Oh, no, you're okay. We're not on this.
Okay.
Oh, you know what?
Good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Education. It is Thursday, January 19th, 2:30. We just had a really productive, interesting conversation with the Vermont Superintendent's Association, which was over at the Capitol Plaza for their annual lunch. Learned a lot on school construction and other fronts. And now we are jumping into the topic of test scores. We'll do our conversation about that, and then disparities in education. And then we're gonna hear from some teachers about what it's like to teach in Vermont, and then we'll adjourn about 4:30. So with that, if you wanna bring our guests in. Oh, they're coming in now, great. And I believe, have you already shared with the committee, Hayden, the documents for this?
Just that topic.
It's just this top? Okay, so everybody has this. How are you, Dr. Boucher?
I am great. How is everyone else?
Good. Are you on your, is Amanda joining you or is it just you?
Amanda is joining and she has the keys to the kingdom, as it were, because she has the presentation. In fact,
Okay.
I actually need to leave at 2:55. I have a hard stop. I have an interview. I'm interviewing someone. There's Amanda.
Dr. Gorham, good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Nice to see you as well. Thank you.
So to bring the committee and others back to where we left off, the question was asked last time, and I believe it may have been the research that you all presented, or perhaps it was someone else that showed a pretty serious decline from about 2011 or 12 to today with NAEP scores in math and literacy. And so those scores showed that a majority of Vermont's children were not reading and writing at grade level and doing math at grade level. We also looked at the rest of the country, and we were, as I recall, kind of, some areas we maybe were a little bit better, but other areas we weren't great. It was Senator Gulick who said, well, how do we compare to our peers in New England? So what I thought we'd do today is a couple of things. I want to take a look at the peers, but I also want you to help us understand, as we mentioned, what is it that kids, what can they or can they not do when we look at these test scores? I mean, help us understand these tests, help us understand. I mean, when you read that third graders aren't reading at grade level, what is it that those that are passing these tests can do and those that aren't passing can't do? Help us with that a little bit. Help us understand the test scores here in New England. And then I think the other piece of it is start to talk to us a little bit about other assessments that are out there. How are we assessing kids? We just left, we were with the superintendents this afternoon. I, for one, remember as a boy taking the Iowa test of basic skills, and I don't necessarily, and I do recall those scores coming back, and they weren't saying, hey, this kid's an astronaut, they were kind of middle of the road, and so I don't want kids to get discouraged when these things come in the mail, but they're telling us something, and help us with this kind of thing so we can talk to our constituents and our teachers and make policy more effectively.
Thank you, Chair. We can definitely do that. So I am prepared to, I'll share that handout up on the screen that we provided earlier today. Let me just pull that up here. Okay. So let's start just by going through the handout, and then I noted your questions as you were sharing them, and so we'll make sure that we touch on those as well. What I have provided for you all to review today is the NAEP's 2022 NAEP results by state, and this is split out by grade and subject for all of our New England states. And I included them in a table, but I do think it helps to be able to see this graph here. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, knowing that I believe you all have the paper copy of this as well. So I'll highlight here that Vermont appropriately is the green bar on the graph. Not intentional, but it works. And our other New England counterparts are here in these other colors. And we have a cluster of bars here for math 4th grade, a cluster for math 8th grade, a cluster for reading in 4th grade, and a cluster for reading in 8th grade. And so we can see that there are some differences here in performance across states. For example, New Hampshire is the yellow bar in all of these clusters, and Massachusetts is the gray bar in all of these clusters. And they do tend to be performing a bit above where Vermont is at. There are also some states that, such as Maine, that is performing slightly below. Also Rhode Island in some cases. And then we see, I believe Connecticut is kind of hovering right around Vermont space across the grades and subject levels here as well. So there is some variability across New England for our 2022 results, but I wouldn't consider it to be, incredibly striking, any differences that we're seeing here with, like, Vermont is not standing out from these states in a particular way. I would say that we're really in the middle in most cases.
Well, for those of us that have a healthy competition with the state of New Hampshire, we'd like to beat New Hampshire, that's for sure. It looks like they are ahead of us.
It's unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Unacceptable. Get Sue New in here. Anyways, please continue. We digress.
So, Mr. Chair, you've asked, what is it that kids can or cannot do as evidenced by these scores, and perhaps also the state summative scores as well. And so I want to express that these scores that are administered across the state are really intended to give us breadth more than depth. These assessments, like the NAEP, we only get state level scores. It's not broken out by school or by district. We don't get granular information from this assessment because it's really intended to get a comparison across states and a comparison to the nation at sort of a higher level. Similarly with our statewide assessments, they're really intended to assess for breadth and not for depth. We try and keep our state assessments as long as they need to be to get reliable information without taking up too much instructional time. And so that means that we do kind of make a sacrifice there, that we don't have a 100 item test that allows us to drill down into each specific content standard and understand exactly what students can and cannot do in the aggregate level. We have a 50 some odd item test, and subscores for a test that length aren't terribly reliable. So I think to learn the answer to that question of what is it that students need to work on that aren't at proficiency as evidenced by these assessments, I think that really turns us to our local assessments. And that leads to your other question about what other assessments are out there. And our districts and schools are delivering other assessments. We might refer to them as interim or benchmark assessments. There are smaller assessments that are given at certain times of the year, usually like beginning, middle, and end. And they really have the rich information. Those assessments give us that depth where we can really dive in and understand what is it that a student can demonstrate for learning and what should they be working on next. And so at the local level, pairing these summative assessments or our knowledge of NAEP in the state with those local assessments, I think is where we see powerful interpretations coming from. But I would recommend that the state summative assessments don't really give us that power to look at that fine detail information.
So what do we get here? What are we getting then when you say, not depth? So tell me, when you look at these, how are these informing your work, your steps, and what you might be saying as a manager at the agency where you need to put time and energy?
Yeah, so I think that in normal circumstances, when we can look at data across years, you know, our state summative assessments allow us to, they allow us to look at gaps, right? Especially for our historically marginalized groups of students, we can monitor over time what is happening with any achievement gaps between groups of students, or what is happening with achievement overall across all of our students over time, so that we can have a sort of a dipstick, right? To say things that we said similarly when we gathered together last time, you know, our ELA scores seem to be kind of consistent across grades, but math didn't look that way. And so we should probably pay some attention to math and look at some other measures to dig deeper into that. And so I think that our summative assessments provide us with a starting point, and should always be used in conjunction with other measures and other sources of information. I think that over the past couple of years, we've struggled a bit with seeing the real value in interpreting these results, because we have had issues with the data quality due to the conditions of the pandemic, where we haven't really been able to look at results over time and patterns and trends and things that we would normally really want to be looking at.
Senator Bullock, you had your hand up?
No, I didn't actually,
Okay.
for a change. I was wondering, are we being filmed? Okay, do we not want to capture what's on the screen? I mean, I'm not the.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
No, that's not what we do.
Okay.
The things, the pieces get edited together later.
Oh, got it, okay.
So again, just to push a little bit more here. So what is it then? How can we, if we're running into constituents, they're seeing these numbers, how do we, I mean, it sounds like you're not maybe in agreement that this is an accurate assessment. I mean, I feel like I'm pushing, but it's important to push because I think we need to understand where our kids really are. So if somebody said to me, visiting a family member out of state, and they said, okay, tell me about kids in reading right now. Where are Vermont kids? What can they do? What can they not do? Can you help us with that?
Yeah, I don't want to overstep Deputy Secretary Heather Boucher, who has her hand raised.
Great. Dr. Boucher.
Sure. Sorry, I had a different point, but I'll address that one as well. So one of the things that we haven't actually presented on in a while that I think is really also useful for state level assessments is to look at broader subpopulation gaps in achievement. And so those are quite strong and maintain and have for quite a long time. So we know that we have achievement gaps, performance gaps on our state assessments for students with disabilities, for students who qualify for free or reduced hot lunch. So those are some of the ways we actually think about that too, that we really use these at a state level for tracking inequity and outcomes. And that should be informing the supports that we're thinking about at a state level in terms of how we actually, we want all of our students to actually succeed, obviously. The other thing I would say, Mr. Chair, I remember the Iowa Test of Basic Skills very well, and Amanda knows that I have often brought those up myself because those types of assessments were very different than what's available on the market now. So I am not even aware that the Iowa Test of Basic Skills exists anymore. The whole gamut of state assessments has really changed in the past decade. There's a lot more involved with a state's teachers actually setting the proficiency standards. And it's why we can't actually, that's why we have to rely on NAEP for comparing from across states. The other piece that I wanted to say, and then I will get at your question, Mr. Chair, is one of the reasons, we're kind of stuck in an interesting place in Vermont because we don't have we don't have, unlike some other states, we don't have a set of benchmark or interim assessments that really tap into what you're trying to get at that everyone uses. And so it really is left up to the individual LEA. So every district is required through EQS to have a local comprehensive assessment system. It would be very difficult for us to actually present what those results were to the committee. I think the best way to do that would be to ask some representative districts to come in and talk about what their local results look like. And we'd be happy to facilitate that for you. It's unfortunate. I think it's a function of the way our education governance is set up in Vermont. In other states, they would be able to actually provide that at a state level. It's just not the way our education system is set up in terms of governance. So what we do have are, and primarily it's because it's required for our federal funding, are these high level state assessments that we've presented to you. And Mr. Chair, could you repeat your question again so that I can make sure I attempt to answer it? Because I took us back on a little different tack. I realized I had a different point.
No, I appreciate it. Let's just stay on this for a second. So there is no way for the administration, and correct me if I'm completely misunderstanding this. I feel like I'm still a new chair. I've only been at this a couple of years. So there's no way that the Agency of Education has an outlook for all schools in Vermont, because they don't report all of those sort of ELAs, don't report all those local scores. Is there some accuracy there? LEAs, sorry.
Yes, we at the state do not collect results from LEAs. Oh yeah, see, Heather got bumped off. I was wondering. We do not collect results from LEA's local assessments. So we don't have that information at the state level. And you know, that would have been, I think, my response to your question, Mr. Chair, is that, you know, our statewide summative assessment is the one tool that's administered to all students across the state. We also have NAEP to look at, but we can't break that down by district and school. So it does have value in allowing us to look at one common measure across all students in the state, especially like Deputy Secretary Boucher said, especially for identifying gaps with students, especially those that identify with historically marginalized groups. We don't, that's just not the way our system is set up right now to collect information on those local assessments.
Senator Brewer.
Did you want to follow yours up?
Well, I was just wondering, so then how do we know what schools need our help if we don't have the data? And I don't know if there's a way that we can say to all of you, legally collect the data. It just, again, seems to me if there are, let's say, for argument's sake, there are 100 schools, there are some that clearly probably need some assistance. And I'm not saying in any bad way, we want to be helpful. And knowing those scores would probably help us, not unlike, I sit in the agriculture committee in the morning. We know, what farms need our assistance in terms of water quality. My God, you'd think we would have that information for kids.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, LEAs have been granted the opportunity to select the assessments that they use at the local level, and so we run into issues with comparability across districts and schools with what assessments are being used. We wouldn't really be able to make sense of scores with the current context that's out there, because we wouldn't be able to sort of compare scores from different assessments that are being used out there. So that would be one challenge that we would be presented with the current state of things.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to say thank you for these comparisons. It's just really nice to be able to put yourself in a context. So thank you for that. I have a natural tendency to want to draw conclusions when I look at data like this, and I'm trying not to. But I do want to just ask, I think maybe one of the things that Chair Campion is getting at is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I am certainly not an expert, but my understanding of the Massachusetts system, for example, is that it's actually quite centralized, and that they are fairly uniform statewide, and they often come up as the best public education system in the country. And I'm just wondering if we can draw any conclusions in terms of, our system, which maybe is less centralized than the Massachusetts system. And if we, again, I guess I'm asking the question, can we draw any conclusions from that comparison? And is it worthwhile to do so? Yeah, does that make sense?
Amanda, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. By the way, I'm sorry that I had wonderfully timed technical glitches right as I was finishing. I did not mean that, and I apologize. So I wanted to address the issue first, and then certainly Senator Gulick, I think that's a great question, but we do actually track how individual schools and districts are doing. That's what our entire federal plan is about. And so we have these data actually are reported at the district and school level as well. They're not out yet this year. We're still working on those, but they are. So this is the SBAC data that is being presented. And we actually have a federally approved way of actually identifying schools that need additional supports from the agency as part of our ongoing continuous improvement efforts. And so I'd be very happy to come back in and actually drill down into that with folks as well, because I don't want to leave the impression that there is no individual district or school information from these state assessments. It's a core part of actually what we're obligated to do. And that's where we also get into the inequity or equity among different subgroups of students. In terms of Senator Gulick, your question, I think it's a great one. I think in Vermont, and in New England, we very much pride local control and having that voice around how our community, our own community students are educated. We want to have really clear input into that. And there are states that actually outperform us, like New York, where I grew up, that are very centralized, just as you're saying. And Massachusetts has always been. Usually it's between Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York, neck and neck on any kinds of standardized tests or other ways of actually thinking about performance from an achievement perspective. All three of them are usually neck and neck. Perhaps it's a coincidence that all three of them have a much more standardized curriculum and a much more standardized set of materials that local entities have to use. There's still flexibility in terms of unit setup, so learning unit setup, but they all have, all three of those have a sophisticated system of even course level tests that are state tests. We've never really had that capacity. I think that's another piece of it. We're a very small state compared to those three. So I think it's a very good question. I'd be very happy for us to continue talking about that. We have in different channels, throughout the past few years have heard about, even from the field, like maybe we should have things more centralized. So we would be very happy to continue thinking about that and looking at some ideas if that's something that folks wanted to continue to do.
Your follow? Would you please send us or point us in the direction of SBACs for the state of Vermont over the past 3 testing periods, so we can get a sense just on our own, where areas perhaps in our district, particular schools might be having a difficult time. Can you send us that information?
I will direct you with some good materials to help you understand it to our state report card, which is where this is. all this
Okay.
information is, and I'd be happy to come back in and actually walk the committee through that. The other caveat I would say, Mr. Chair, is again, you probably want to look at data before COVID
Sure.
and then
sure.
current, because again, what
Good
COVID
point.
has done to all states is really
Yeah, absolutely.
mess up the assessments in terms of the fidelity of them. And so we have to, so that's why like the last 3, I'm kind of like, let's look at least the last
Sure.
5 and
Yeah.
kind of take a look at those. But I'd be very happy to, and I can give you the
That'd be
link
good. And
right now.
Yeah, send us the link to our committee assistant, please, and he can share it with everybody. But the NAEP scores that we looked at went back to 2012, and it was
Correct.
a pretty precipitous drop in all areas. So, yeah. Senator Reeves.
Kind of piggybacking on the chairman's comment. So just curious if the NAEP scores, the trend lines which we saw last week, covering over the past 10 years, if those trends were mirrored in these other New England states that you've offered in this spotlight graphic. Just
That would be a
just-
question for Amanda, Senator. I'm going to scoot, and I apologize. I have to leave. Amanda, do you have this one?
Yep, thank you, Heather.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I did not prepare historical trend data across all the New England states for today, but it's something that I can absolutely look into so that we can see if we're seeing a similar situation across these states, you know, how student performance has changed over the past decade or so.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please, that would be great. That'd be great. So then can you give us a sense, Amanda, of what, based on these scores, what students know and what they're not? Students that aren't testing proficient, what are the things that they cannot do?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question real quick? I was just noting down the request.
If you're not proficient, I'll give you a specific example. If you're a kid in 4th grade and you're not proficient in math or literacy, what are the things that these kids cannot do?
So I would say that these assessments are not designed to give the specific answer that you're looking for. And I know that that's not the best answer to give. But these are assessments that are looking at breadth and not depth. These are assessments that are designed for very specific purposes. And those local assessments, again, are going to give that information because our educators have helped us to develop these assessments to be able to measure proficiency across a number of, we'll call them domains within each specific grade level and content area. So for math at the younger grade levels, we might have numeracy as a domain. We might have, algebraic thinking as another domain, and maybe data and statistics as another domain, right? And students are receiving a number of items in each domain, and we can't really draw a conclusion across all students that if they're not proficient, then they are really struggling in data science or data and statistics. It really does come down to kind of looking at those more local assessments to understand the answer to that question, because it wouldn't be the same answer for all students. We do receive information on those specific domains for these assessments. So we do have the ability to see what % of students are sort of meeting the standard in each of those domains. The caveat is that some of those domains include as few as 2 test questions. And so it gets really hard to deal with that low level of reliability, and it gets really hard to draw valid conclusions from that kind of information when we're only looking at, say, 2 items in one domain versus 10 in another domain.
Can you give us some examples as it relates then to the NECAP scores? As again, proficient or not proficient?
I'm sorry, do you mean NAEP?
No, I was thinking, Secretary Boucher just mentioned NECAP scores. I think they,
Okay.
yeah, that. And again, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to jump in so that we're trying to be helpful here. But in understanding the data is key. It's also key because our constituents, there have been articles about this and we want to be able to respond effectively to them. So can you give us an example or two of what a kid who, again, isn't proficient based on the NECAP scores does or doesn't know?
Maybe what they're testing.
Or what they're testing for? All that would be, yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. What we might be able to provide that would be helpful, I'm not sure. I suppose providing both might be helpful, but what we can provide is called the test blueprint for our state assessments. So as you know, we are entering into a new contract with a new assessment this year. So I could provide the test specifications or the test blueprint for this year, our new assessment, and also for the Smarter Balance and the Vermont Science assessments that we've used in the past. And that shows you the breakdown of each assessment. So it would show you for ELA, for math, and for science, what are students being asked to demonstrate with these assessments and how much of the assessment is composed with that demand, we'll call it. And so I could share that information with you so that we could start to look at what exactly is being asked of students on these assessments. And that might help to inform thinking around what the assessments are actually telling us more contextually.
Be great. Yes.
Just a specific along the same vein, if a student in grade 4 in math and reading is not proficient, what's the ramification? Are they moved to grade 5, or is there another test which indicates, validates that they're ready to move onward? I'm just at a loss in that regard.
Our state assessments do not have negative consequences imposed by the state for any students. So their score does not indicate at the state level, there's no advisement or recommendation that a score would indicate any decisions being made about a student. And again, we always encourage and recommend that this information is not used on its own for any decision making and should always be used with other measures and information.
Okay.
Anything else from you, Dr. Corman?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair. I see that I have a couple of things to get back to you with, like the trends over time for all New England states with NAEP, and also the test specifications for our previous assessment and the new assessment coming this year. And I know that Deputy Secretary Boucher will be sharing the state report card link with you folks, and we'll be happy to continue this conversation.
That'd be great. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the agency's eye, are your eyes on those schools? Do you know those schools, those 25 schools that really need our help out there?
Yes, that's something that the agency has very keen awareness of. It's not something that my folks on my team are particularly closely involved with. Working with those schools in that process, but it's something that, like Heather, Deputy Secretary Boucher had said, we'd be happy to come back and take you all through that and share more on it.
Committee, any other questions? Secretary French come in about 10 minutes. Anything else? No. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Secretary French come in person.